Hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I am Catherine, and we are back with part 7 of our F101 Spring Break Sprint, where I am talking about Formula One history and lore from before I became an F1 fan midway through the 2021 season. We have the first episode in the series linked above, which has a little bit more context, but I am here to help educate other Drive to Survive era Formula One fans about the sport. In yesterday's episode, I broke down that one time Michael Schumacher almost broke F1, going 17 for 17 on podiums and finishing the Drivers' Championship with 6 races to go. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss a video in this series and all season long, and so I can continue to inflict my motorsport opinions upon the greater population. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform so that we can have as many people as possible hearing my thoughts. So as I said in the teaser at the last episode, we are talking about countries and circuits that F1 has only ever been to once. And first, we're going to talk about the country, because there's only one country in the history of Formula One where they have only raced at that one specific circuit one time, and that is in Casablanca in Morocco in 1958. So the Casablanca Grand Prix was actually held 13 times, but 1958 was the only time it was held as part of the F1 World Championship after the existence of the FIA became a thing in 1950. And if you remember going back to the Best on Debut episode that we did a couple of days ago, which is linked above, that's that technicality of like, yes, they've won races before, but they weren't F1 races. So that's where that is. This was also the last race of the championship that season in 58, where it was Mike Hawthorne and Sterling Moss. Moss won the race, Hawthorne clinched the championship. Van Wall was actually the World Constructors' Championship at the time, but their celebrations were very much muted in light of the fact that at that race, Stuart Lewis Evans had a fatal crash on lap 41 and then died from his injuries 6 days later. Very unfortunate. Now, moving on to circuits that F1 has only raced at once, it's actually very interesting. So I was thinking about putting them in some sort of order. I don't even remember the initial order that I pulled it from, but it's not chronological, I'll tell you that. But then I realized that the last one is kind of the most fun one. So we're kind of keeping the order as it is. So we're going to be hopping around through history here, starting in Sebring, Florida, which I had never heard of Sebring, Florida before. And I did Google it, and it looks like it's like east of Sarasota, like in the middle of the bottom part of Florida, it kind of smack in the middle of nowhere, or in the middle of Sebring, Florida. The Sebring International Raceway was the only F1 race there, but the raceway is still one of the oldest continuously operated racetracks in the United States. Now, moving on to another one and done in the United States is the Riverside International Raceway in Moreno Valley, California, where they held the race in 1960. It was the season finale. That is my only note for it, so clearly it wasn't all that exciting. And if it was, I missed that. Oops. But the next race is actually a very interesting one. We're sticking in the United States. We are going to Dallas, Texas to Fair Park and the Fair Park Temporary Street Circuit for the race in 1984. This race, in the infinite wisdom, was scheduled for the first week of July, or technically the second week because it was held on the 8th. But there were 26 cars that qualified out of 27 entries, but only 8 drivers finished the race because it was 100 degrees out and the tires were basically melting. Of the 8 finishers, this was back in the day when the points only went down to P6. So the 2 unfortunate non-points finishers were actually people we talked about in our F1 driver family episode, which is linked above. It was Corrado Fabi and Manfred Winkelhock. So those 2 names kind of jumped out at me when I was doing the research for this one. I was like, oh, very interesting. But yeah, they have not gone back to Dallas since. Obviously, we are very well situated in COTA because it is a permanent purpose-built track, and those tend to be a little bit of the better tracks of the United States Grand Prix, with the exception of like the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which is really just also not suited for Formula One, but that's a whole other story entirely. We have an episode about it though, the 2005 Grand Prix. It was a weird one. Watch below. Now, moving on to 1993, we're going to the UK, but we're not going to Silverstone, obviously, because Silverstone is not and will never be a one-off. But we are going to Donington Park, which was one of the many races to be home to the European Grand Prix. And we're going to do an episode on the European Grand Prix later because there's so many different races that are called the European Grand Prix. So we're going to dive into that later this month. Now, this was a replacement race after the race in Japan fell through. Not any of the ones that we talked about in the where drivers clinched the championship episode, but there was another race in Japan that never materialized. So they had to replace this one last minute, which these are all, interestingly, these are a lot of last minute replacement races. Not this next one, though, which is the Portuguese Grand Prix in 1959, which was held at the Circuito de Monsanto. I totally butchered that pronunciation. I'm sorry to my sister-in-law who is Portuguese for butchering that so badly. But it was actually the third race held at Monsanto, but the first for Formula One and the 8th overall Portuguese Grand Prix. Now, moving on to another replacement race, back in time 2 years back to the 1957 season, we're going to Pescara, Italy. And this was turned into a replacement race after the Belgian and Dutch Grand Prix were canceled that season. It was scheduled a week before the season finale at Monza, back when Monza was an F1 season finale, which we also talked about in the Clinchers episode, the first one in the series. And it was the first time, 1957 was the first time that a country held more than one F1 race in the same season, which is kind of funny when you think about it now. 3 races in the United States. For a while, there were 2 races in Italy between Monza and Imola. It's kind of funny to me now. You know that I'm entertained by things. And speaking of other Italian tracks, we have the International Autodrome at Mugello, which became a replacement race in 2020 when F1 had to figure out how to have a competitive season in the middle of the pandemic, and it led to having a couple of countries hosting 2 races either in the same country or on the same track with just 2 different names. The Austrian Grand Prix and the Styrian Grand Prix were both just races at the Red Bull Ring. And then Monza and Mugello both hosted replacement races in Italy that year. And this is the first and only race to be called the Tuscan Grand Prix. And it was also the first time a Thai driver finished on the podium in Formula One history when Alex Albon did that. Now, the next track that we're going to it's a German track that they abbreviate to AVUS. This was the 1959 German Grand Prix. It's the autumn. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. I'm not. But it is the only German Grand Prix that was not raced for Formula One at the Nürburgring or at Hockenheim. And the circuit is basically a Q-tip. I'm going to put it up here, and you're going to see it basically looks like a Q-tip. It is a circuit that is mostly featured for its banking at each end of it. It's basically like a 2-lane roadway with really, really big bank curves and it's kind of wild. If you compare it to like the Indy 500 banking curves, it's like this, and the AVUS is like this. So it's pretty ridiculous. And the Grand Prix was actually raced in heats due to safety and tire wear concerns. So there was 2 separate heats, and they kind of just squished the races together. The race only had 7 finishers and 8 retirements with 2 non-starters. So kind of an interesting one. The next race was the Circuit Bugatti in France in 1967. And the Circuit Bugatti is actually a circuit that is still in use today, not for Formula One motorsport, in France. And it is part of the Le Mans circuit, where part of Bugatti is like part of the Le Mans main circuit, and then part of it is purpose built. The 1967 Grand Prix was known to be pretty boring, and only 20,000 people showed up. So kind of explains why they haven't ever gone back there, though it does continue to host the French Motorcycle Grand Prix. And the last but not least is the Zeltweg Flugplatz airfield in Austria in 1964. The track layout it was in a temporary airport facility, and the track layout is literally just a hockey stick. I will put it up here so you can look at it and laugh. There were 105 laps to this race. That's a lot of laps for an F1 race. And clearly the timing rules that we have today for how long a race can be did not apply back in 1964. It was also the F1 debut for Jochen Rindt, who was the first Austrian driver to compete in Formula One and ended up becoming world champion one day. So I think that it's really interesting that we have, these one-off tracks that just were, you could get away with having some really interesting circuits, whether it's our friend the hockey stick or it's our other friend the Q-tip, back in the era where anything goes. And now they're so specific about what circuits can look like and how they're designed and built. And there's so much intention to that you really didn't have in these early days of motorsport. So it's really interesting to see those comparisons between then and now. Now, coming up next is episode 8. We are going to talk about the women who have stood on an F1 podium to accept the Constructors' Championship trophies, because obviously we haven't had a female driver finish in the podium yet. But we're going to talk about the women because there aren't that many of them, which is kind of typical. But anyway, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.